Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I am Cosmic, and Gearbox's Dota-inspired first-person shooter Battleborn is finally here. A game that many in the run-up had unfairly written off, probably due to the likes of the hype behind Blizzard's hero shooter Overwatch. The question is the MOBA-infused first-person shooter any good? Does it hold its own in the hero shooter genre? So let's grab some cereal, put our feet up, and let's get into it. Battleborn's setting takes place in a futuristic sci-fi fantasy universe where a species known as the Virelsi have destroyed pretty much all of the galaxy, forcing all of the species that remain to flee to the last remaining star system known as Solus. These species are in different factions, however they are forced to unite against their common foe, the Virelsi. Each faction sends their best fighters against the mysterious foe, and these warriors are thus known as the Battleborn. The setting by itself isn't particularly bad, however it doesn't have a unique feeling per se. it does feel very similar to the likes of Wildstar setting, where all the races of the universe converge on one focal point and events ensue. Technically, the game runs pretty well for me personally on an Intel processor, clocking in at a solid 60 frames per second. However, it has been known to have problems with AMD processors, so if you do have an AMD processor, you may want to take heed. The control layout for the game is very intuitive, and players of first-person shooters and MOBAs alike will be right at home with the control scheme in Battleborn. PC version does support a use of a gamepad, although I don't know why you would want to use it in a first-person shooter. But enough small talk about the little things, let's talk about what we all want to talk about, which is the core gameplay and the mechanics themselves. Now, Battleborn has a large starting roster of 25 characters, most of which have to be unlocked either by ranking up your commander level or meeting certain challenge criteria, such as completing a certain story mission. The variety in the roster is something that I really like about the Battleborn game. It is something that is necessary for such a large roster. Now, each character certainly plays differently, each having strengths and weaknesses and unique abilities. However, when it comes to the actual visuals of the characters, some kind of look very similar, if not a little bit generic, which is a bit of a shame considering that you have characters like Wrath that looks really stand out, he looks really unique, but then you have characters that, could be literally from any game, like Oscar Mike. The core of Battleborn's content is divided into two parts, the PvP section and the player versus environment section. The player versus environment section consists of story missions, which work very similar to Destiny raids. It's essentially about you teaming up or going solo into a story mission, which works essentially going through a pretty large level at that, but a level nonetheless, facing down mindless hordes of your standard enemies and then meeting bosses every once in a while, finally crescendoing in a penultimate boss. The story mission content has taken a page or three out of Gearbox's previous titles, the Borderlands series, when it comes to its actual content. It plays very similar to Borderlands in some respects. It has that Borderlands humour about it. As you go through the level, characters will talk through the comms, you'll get to see their faces. It's very Handsome Jack-esque, especially with the villains of the game, and it's very, very funny. It's very, very well written, and it's an enjoyable experience. I was actually impressed at how fun the actual story mission content was. I thought it was going to be quite laborious and grindy, and at some point it does become that, because you've done that mission over and over and you've heard all there is to hear, you've seen all there is to see, and you're basically doing it for the gear at that point. However, it is nonetheless high quality content that isn't just tacked on for something to do other than the multiplayer. What I like even most about the player versus environment content is that the things that you acquire, such as the gear and experience, will carry over into the multiplayer side of the game. So you can go and play with your friends, do some story missions, earn gear that you can then use in your player versus player matches. The gear itself works very simply and works from a shard system, very similar to MOBA style item shops. Before you go into a match or into a story mission, if you have gear, you can put it into a 3-slot loadout. And then as you play the game, you will earn shards from various things, and you'll be able to then activate that gear in the game, and then you will gain a statistical bonus directly relating to what the item is. It's all stuff you've seen before in Battleborn. There's no new mechanics here. There's nothing innovative in any way. However, what it is, it's well put together, it's well executed, and it looks great for the most part, but I'll get onto that in a moment. Let's talk about the PvP side of things. Now, there's 3 PvP modes available. You have Incursion, which is essentially your classic MOBA match. There are 2 basically bases, and you go forth and push creeps and take down enemy sentry bots until you destroy their core. It's that simple. There's nothing new about it. It's essentially in first person. It is, of course, by no means reinventing the wheel, so to speak. However, what it is content that works, and it plays really, really well, and it is a hell of a lot of fun, especially with the characters and the setting that you actually have to play in. The other 2 modes are Capture and Meltdown. Now, Capture is your basically capture the point, hold the point match that is relatively nothing new again. Meltdown, however, is something a little bit unique, and it's something a little bit interesting and fun to play once in a while, and essentially is about escorting your minions to sacrifice to a volcano god so that he is satisfied, and the more minions you sacrifice, the more points you get, all the while the enemy is trying to sacrifice their own minions, and you're trying to stop each other's from getting to the sacrifice point. So there's plenty of content in there. Now, what I like about Battleborn's content isn't what's in the content, it's how it's executed. Usually when you get a game that tries to do a little bit of everything, they fail miserably, and they don't even become a jack of all trades, because ultimately the quality of the content suffers. In Battleborn, however, that is not the case. The content is high quality throughout, and I really, really enjoyed it. While I would say that the longevity of the game ultimately relies on the multiplayer aspect of the game in terms of the player versus player stuff, I don't think that's necessarily true, since Gearbox are going to be releasing story mission updates and new content. So I think ultimately, as a whole package, it has enough longevity and replayability in every aspect of the game to satisfy most people. When it comes down to the combat, I actually really enjoyed the combat. The uniqueness of each character, even though it is technically a first-person shooter, the majority of characters don't even have guns. You have Wrath, who has swords, you have characters who have spells, you have characters who have rocket launchers. It's all that kind of thing, and there's a mix and match and variety, and there's basically a character for everybody. Most of the characters can take on 1 or more roles, such as Umbra, who is essentially a damage dealer and a healer combined, who isn't great at everything to the point of others, but does enough in both aspects to be very useful for the team. The character progression system in the game is taken straight from MOBA style games, in the sense that you have an overall character rank, which denotes your proficiency with that character to others, as well as unlocking various cosmetic and lore items. However, every time you start a match, be it story mission or PvP content, you start at level 0, and you then level up as the match progresses via experience points and the helix system. Now, the helix system is essentially a stat tree that you can basically each level decide to choose and modify one ability in a certain way, whichever suits your playstyle essentially. I really like the helix system. It also unlocks a 3rd item, which is a mutagen, as you progress in character rank, which is something that those who want to specialize on a certain character will find very useful. I really like the combination of FPS and MOBA, even though I technically don't really like the MOBA word. Ultimately, the mechanical blend of the 2 works very well for Battleborn, and I think it makes it a lot more complex mechanically than a game like Overwatch, which, while they are wildly different in what they're trying to do and what they're trying to offer, they are ultimately similar at the core in the sense that they are hero shooters. Something that was disappointing about the character progression wasn't the helix system itself, but it was the overall character progression. As you level up your overall character rank, you'll not only unlock mutagens for the helix system, but you unlock cosmetics as well. Now, the cosmetics are very lackluster. They are very basic, just color change, challenges, and it's something that it would have been nice if the developers have put a little effort into to make each character feel unique, make those people who have really spent time with playing the characters and invested time into those characters come out with something more than just changing red to purple. Which leads me nicely to my biggest problem with the game, the visuals. Don't get me wrong, I like the cartoon aesthetic of the game. The sound is phenomenal. I absolutely love the musical score, but more importantly, I love the voice acting in the game. The game is really well written. It is really well voice acted. It is really, really funny at times. Some of it isn't, but that is the case with Gearbox style games when they put in their Borderlands style humour. It's going to be hit and miss, but the quality of the voice work is phenomenal. The visuals, however, are too over the top. Now I get it, the game is supposed to be over the top. It's over the top in every aspect. It's over the top in every sense. However, when it comes to visuals and when you're trying to make a first-person shooter, especially a first-person shooter that has a lot going on in the screen at any one time, with this sheer amount of enemies that you're going to be facing in both story mission content and player versus player content, when you have such over-the-top, vibrant visuals, things get messy, and visually, it is like seeing someone throw up all over your screen. Not only do your eyes not know where to look sometimes, or you can't even see what's going on because there's so many colours, but it directly affects gameplay, especially for certain characters like Boulder, who essentially enters a rage at some points in which the complete outsides of the screen go yellow, and when you've got half the screen taken up by yellow cracks, and then on top of that you can't see what's going on because there's so many AoE spells going off, you're just basically blind. You can't see a thing, and it really affects how you play. It affects, ultimately, especially in a player versus player environment, it affects your performance, and you're a sitting duck because you don't know if you're running into a wall or running back. It is mind-boggling why they thought to just go so over the top with the visuals, and it's really disappointing, and it's a really big letdown, and ultimately it becomes really, really frustrating, to the point of that Boulder, for example, is one of my favorite looking characters. He plays really well, but because of that essential handicap that he has visually, I don't want to play him anymore, because ultimately I know I'm going to get frustrated at some point during a match, and it's going to cost me in deaths. Finally, I wanted to touch on 2 points that were also disappointing. The first being that, considering that the game is a story-driven, world-building game, they don't let you queue for the story missions in order. In fact, what you have to do is just queue to do story missions, and then 3 choices, 4 choices pop up, and you are able to vote for which one you want to do, instead of being able to queue for a specific one and do them all in order. Secondly, the advanced and hardcore modes of the story mode missions were very disappointing, in the fact that they didn't really add any difficulty other than increasing bosses' health and damage outputs. It took me 40 minutes to down the final boss on Heliophage on advanced, just simply because they had so much health. It wasn't any more difficult than it already was previously in normal mode. It was just the fact that he had so much health. It took my team 40 minutes just to get him down, which isn't really more difficult, and I wouldn't call it advanced or indeed hardcore. It was just simply time consuming and annoying, which was a little bit of a letdown. That all being said, however, ultimately Battleborn is a great game. I like it a hell of a lot than previous titles such as Borderlands. I think it has a lot of content to offer. It's a lot of fun. It does have its clear issues, particularly on the visual side. However, I think that for what you get for $60, I think is well worth it. I think there's plenty of content to be experienced, with more on the way. The game's multiplayer modes definitely need more maps to add more variety and more interesting things to be happening. I'm not sure if the decision to make future DLC paid DLC is the right idea. I think that they could have done with free content updates. I think that would have been good, and then added in paid expansions. I think that would have been the way to go. a couple of free maps here or there would probably set the right tone for the player base. Even though there were things in the game that did disappoint me, ultimately I came out feeling very surprised. I think it's high quality, it's a lot of fun, it's a little bit over the top sometimes to the point of being, you think, oh, that's just too much. However, I think overall Gearbox have produced a really solid title that, ultimately is a lot of fun and it's great to play. If you're interested in Battleborn, I certainly recommend picking it up. I think it is a fantastic game that does have some flaws and unique elements, but ultimately I think that the good points outweigh the bad for the most part. Hopefully Gearbox will offer a great amount of post-launch support, not just with the DLC but also with balance changes and maybe even some visual changes to certain characters to make them more playable. And that's my review of Battleborn. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Please hit that share button and subscribe, and I will see you next time.